Hi everybody. So in this video I'm not going to be doing sort of a walkthrough tutorial, these are just a few tips. So I'm just going to be showing you some setups that I've done so you can see just some different ideas. So in this one what we've done is I've got two different cameras working at the same time, so you can actually create cuts. All you need to do is just add a second camera and then just shorten it, as I've done here, by just grabbing the end of the clip and just moving it around like so. And what I've done is not the most effective one, so I've just done it quickly, but you can see that here's my camera 1, and then camera 2 should be in there somewhere. I don't know why we can't see it, but anyway, perhaps because it's not, whoops, perhaps because the time playhead marker is not, there we go. So we can see our second camera now that the second camera's kicked in. Of course, I wasn't thinking. And basically all you need to do is just, as you place it on the timeline, then that second camera will kick in. So I've got a sort of slow zoom and focus move here, and then I cut to a second camera, which is doing that, you see? And just like before, I've just adjusted the position and focal distance of both. If I was doing it properly, I might have added some graph work to make it, make them move a bit more kind of fluidly and more interesting movement and so on. But anyway, this is the point, is you can just use two or more cameras to create your own almost like virtual studio. So you can film a subject from different angles and what have you and create whole sequences. I mean, the other thing you can do, of course, is just output each one separately and then edit it in Premiere. But it's just one of those things, because it is limited in one way, because you can't alter the opacity of the camera, so you can't cross dissolve between them very easily and all that sort of thing. So it's you'll get more flexibility if you do each shot separately in After Effects and then move it into Premiere to do transitions and things. But just as a basic setup, you can have these two cameras running at the same time, and then they'll just kick in as and when they overlap. Yeah. Cool. So next technique. Okay, so my next tip is just a little bit of kind of more subtle movement with the camera. What you can do is, if you go up to the position here, so here's my position, I've just done 2 keyframes, and so what's happening is I'm basically adjusting my position in like by X, Y and Z dimensions between these 2 keyframes. But if I right click on position and click separate dimensions, what we then get is we get each X, Y and Z position with its own separate stopwatch. And the nice thing about that is you can just use that to kind of fettle your movement a bit more specifically by each point. But the other thing, of course, that you can do, which is rather nice, is you can add a speed graph to each individual point. So you can just go for a speed graph purely on the X position, for example, and not on the Y and Z. So let's say, for example, you wanted to have a nice kind of consistent XY track, but then you wanted to zoom at a more kind of like, you wanted to speed the zoom up and have a bit more kind of interest in it, then you could do that, so that's entirely feasible. So it's just one of those things you can try by right clicking and separating those bits out. It just gives you a bit more control over your camera movement. Okay. So another nice tip for just fettling your camera movement, just to get a bit more interest, is in this first camera, camera 1, what I've got is this sort of slow zoom in like so. Okay, and if I come to the top view, so I normally like the custom view 1, that's how I normally like to kind of look at my 3D scene, but that's just a personal preference. But if we come to the top view, it's much more easy to see what we call the motion path. This is the line that the camera is taking, so if you follow along, you can see the camera moving along that path between those 2 keyframes. Yeah, and what you can do is, here's my track in, say a zoom, it's not a zoom of course, it's a track, isn't it? Well, dolly, really. It's a dolly shot, moving the camera front to back, like so. And you can just add a bit more interest, a bit more subtlety to that. If you come up to the pen tool here, and then you can click, if I zoom in one, hold down space to move it around. If I click on one of these keyframes, I can add a Bezier curve. There you go. And so you don't want to go over the top with these sorts of things, but it's just a bit subtle. You can see it just subtly alters the movement of that dolly. you know. Now obviously you could do something similar by tracking the camera and adjusting the orientation and that sort of thing, you know. But I think what it does, it just gives you a nice sort of simple, you know, quick way of just adding a little bit more interest to that. I mean, obviously you can go crazy if you want to. You could add another one down here and do a whole kind of wiggle if you wanted to. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could do if you particularly wanted to. This isn't a substitute for doing like a handheld technique, by the way. I'm going to be showing you how to do a handheld technique in a minute. So this is more just about adding interest to a movement motion path at the moment. Okay. All right, so this time what we're going to do is we're going to make a handheld kind of feel to one of our cameras. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to do it on the 50mm that I've got kind of moving around the subject, so this one here. Okay, so this was the one earlier that we separated out the three position dimensions. So if we want to get those back together again, all we need to do is just hold down Shift and highlight all three, then just right click and then take away that separate dimensions, and that'll just go back into one single position. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to add an expression. Now as you get into After Effects, you'll find that expressions are a kind of key part of developing your skill set, you know, and they seem a little bit alien at first because it's like, oh my god, you're messing with After Effects, you're actually adding code. You're not really adding code, you're just kind of, it's a different way of adding a kind of an effect. It's actually in the DNA of the clip, if you like, rather than adding an effect on top of it. So what we're going to be doing is coming to this position stopwatch here, and I'm going to hold down the Option key on my Mac keyboard and then click. And now what I get is this box, this dialog box here, which says transform position. What do you want me to do basically with this position? You know, what kind of change are you wanting me to make? Not as an effect applied to it, but as an actual change to the thing itself. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a wiggle expression. So I'm just going to type wiggle. Okay, and you can select that wiggle there. Select it already. There you go. Hit return. And so now it says, all right, what values do you want for wiggle? Okay. What I'm going to do at the moment is I'm going to type in 6 and 6. So I'm going to go 6, and I'll explain what these are in a minute. 6, 6, and then click outside that box. And what you'll find now is that as it moves, it should, I mean, perhaps I should have gone a bit further up actually with the motion, just to give you a sense of what's going on here. But rather than having that smooth movement that we had before, hopefully you can now see it starting to wiggle a little bit. It looks a little bit more handheld. Do you see what I mean? And so rather than typing in different values, because you never really know exactly how much to sort of do with these two different bits. So the first number from our wiggle expression is the frequency. It's the amount of times a wiggle occurs, and the second one is the amplitude. So it's the amount of wiggle that happens when a wiggle occurs. So if we're saying, you know, a wiggle happens once every second, and we might say it doesn't have much amplitude, then it would happen once every second and it wouldn't really move very much. Whereas if you're saying having 2 wiggles a second and lots of amplitude, then you'll see a lot more movement. And what we're going to do is, rather than always having to be typing in new numbers and now sort of almost stab in the dark until we kind of figure out exactly what proportion of amplitude and frequency works best for our composition, we're actually going to create ourselves an effect controller, almost like a rig, which allows us to control these expressions in a much more kind of direct way. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up to Layer at the top and New and Null Objects. If you remember Null Object from motion tracking and what have you, a null is simply a clip that has no data in it. And what we can do is we can use that null to apply like a controller, which we can then use to control our expression. So what we're going to do is make sure our null is highlighted, and we're going to go up to Effect and Expression Controls, and we're going to go to Slider Control. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to Effect again and another Slider Control. So this is a really good tip I got from Motion Science. I talked about videocopilot.net in a previous tutorial, who are also really, really excellent with their tutorials. Motion Science, they do their stuff on YouTube, and again, it's fabulous stuff for After Effects, so really do check that one out as well, in terms of taking your After Effects further. So what we're going to do is, remember I said that these two values were frequency and amplitude. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this one so I know what it is, and I'm going to call this frequency. Oh, there we go. And then I'm going to right click on this one and rename this amp. So frequency and amplitude. Okay. And then what we do, so here's our null object with these two sliders in. These sliders at the moment, they do literally nothing because we haven't told them what value they're going to adjust. So they are literally just there doing literally nothing at all until we give them something to do. So the way we do that is we come back down to our wiggle expression here. Okay, we click into it and we highlight just the first number. Okay, and if you come across, you'll see, if you remember the pick whip, which is normally there, well look, there's a little pick whip here which applies to that expression, and we can also add a motion graph and what have you to it as well. And what we're going to do this time is we're just going to pick up this little pick whip and we're going to parent it to the frequency slider, like so. And then we're going to go to our other number, which is the amplitude, and we're going to parent that by using the pick whip to the amplitude slider. And now we click away from that. Now we can, so at the moment this is our clip with no movement at all, because those two sixes that we typed in earlier, they've gone because we've now attached those values to this slider, which is set to 0. But if I now ramp this up to, I don't know, 8 and this one up to 25, you'll see what's happened is that we're now going to get a lot more movement. So the slider for frequency is saying, yep, I want to up the amount of times a wiggle occurs. And when a wiggle occurs with the amplitude, I want it to be quite dramatic. So now we've got this sort of extra dramatic handheld kind of look, you know, which is wiggling all over the place, which probably doesn't really work, you know, from a subtlety point of view. But, you know, but it's quite good fun. So anyway, so that's a really nice way of adding a sort of handheld look to your camera, and then what you can do is once you've kind of added the expression and added the sliders, then you can just adjust that to your heart's content until you get something that you like the look of, you know. So that will be very subtle. For example, with a frequency of 3 and an amplitude of 5, you're not going to see that very much at all, you know, but it's going to be a nice subtle kind of handheld effect compared to the previous one. Let's just see what that looks like. There you go. So you barely notice it, but it's just there if you're looking for it. Yeah. Cool. So that's it. So yeah, those are just a few extra tips in terms of working with cameras in After Effects. Again, the best thing to do is just practice and try these things out though. So yeah, look forward to seeing what you come up with. Nice one.